this week at the World Bank IMF spring meetings, the focus really has been on the biggest issues facing the global economy. Global growth has been downgraded. Emerging economies aren't growing as fast as many leaders and policymakers expected. There's a lot of volatility in commodity markets, and financial turbulence still persists. But there is one bright spot in the global economy, and that is India. India is now the world's fastest growing major economy and has outpaced China. Now, if we look at India's GDP figures, India is currently growing at an annual rate at around 7.5% per annum. And according to both the World Bank and the IMF, the country is expected to maintain that 7.5% growth for the next 2 years. Now, a lot of the growth in India has been driven by private consumption, a pickup in industrial activity, increased private investment, and all those lower energy prices around the world have actually been helping the economy. Now, economic growth in India under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership has a lot of political pundits wondering whether India could be the world's next superpower. The country still faces a lot of challenges. So to talk more about this, I sat down with World Bank's chief economist for South Asia, Martin Rama, and I started by asking Rama, what are some of the factors that have really been behind India's economic growth?
First is the demographic transition. This is a country where there are increasingly young people coming into the labor force, fewer kids relative to the people in working ages. And even for a constant productivity, if the productivity of a worker does not change, the fact that you have more people working, and that helps a lot. Second is, I think the entire region, India with it, is reaping the benefits from education, investments in education. So the average education of the workforce is increasing, so the same people are now more skilled. And then, very importantly, there is the urbanization process, which is a big transformation. People are moving out of agriculture into cities. Cities in South Asia are messy, they could be more productive, but they are still more productive than being in agriculture. Now, on top of that, there are other things happening. I think the decline in oil prices helped India, helped South Asia. This is the region that benefited the most from cheap oil prices because it is a big importer of oil.
Now, India's economy may be growing fast, but what's growing even faster is skepticism surrounding that 7.5% GDP growth figure. Many economists say that idle factories, sagging exports, troubled banks could perhaps indicate that that figure is somewhat exaggerated. Do you share in that skepticism?
No. For the following reason. India has a very strong statistical institute. So I'm sure, as in any developing country, as in any industrial country, we can have quibbles with the way things are measured. I think the problem with India is not to know whether 7.5 or 7.4 is the true figure, is to know whether India could do, as China did, double-digit growth.
Many economists say that if India continues on this growth path, it could become the world's next superpower. Do you think that that is achievable, say, in perhaps the next decade?
No, I don't think so. I think on a longer-term perspective, India and South Asia will be a very highly populated part of the world. So if you think that at some point, as all countries develop, the sheer numbers of population are what drive economic power, economic might, then for sure China and India will be the two biggest economic powers we will have. Compared to them in terms of population, the EU or the United States will be half or less than half. In 10 or 20 years, if you use plausible growth rates, what we expect, or rather what we hope, is that India and South Asia will be the next East Asia. Over the last 20, 30 years, the big transformation of the world was in East Asia.
China's first quarter GDP figures came out recently, and it showed that first quarter GDP was 6.7% in China. That's the slowest quarterly figure we've seen in 7 years. Is the slowdown in the Chinese economy going to be an economic opportunity for India?
India imports a lot from China, doesn't export a lot to China. It's not an exporter of raw materials or mineral products or food to China. The key markets for India and for South Asia are Europe and the United States. So the slowdown in China, from that perspective, is not a big concern. On the other hand, the kind of what is behind the slowdown in China is a very fundamental transformation where salaries are increasing, social protection is improving, the economy is being redirected to services. And so the big questions for India and for South Asia is, will they be able to take advantage of the space that China may be creating by not being a cheap producer of garments and light manufacturing products as it was, as it moves to IT and other more sophisticated products? Will South Asia be able to take that window? Will South Asia and India in particular become the next manufacturing hub of the world? And the answer there is maybe.
Many investors I've spoken to over the years constantly say how difficult it is to do business in India. This is clearly impacting the country. What can the Modi government do to ensure that investors and businesses, foreign businesses, can really flourish in the country?
When Mr. Modi was the chief minister for Gujarat, he had a very vibrant business environment in Gujarat with the same complex laws that India has. So the national laws were the same. So this shows first that it's not all about regulations, it's how you go about implementing things. And on that, I think there is quite a strong resolve to move forward.